It seems to be working. Cool. Nice. Love to see it. Let me just grab my device. And we are live on everything, I think, right now. Seems like. Okay. Just testing things. All right, so I'm streaming live here for the first time on a couple platforms. Let me just post this on the gram here. Okay. Cool. Yeah, thanks for joining as well too. Hola, mi amigo, ¿cómo estás? Está muy bien, ¿y tú? Very excited to be doing a stream here. Sorry, just getting stuff kind of set up on the back end here. And then we'll get stuff going here. But right now, on your screen, you see I have Unreal Engine. This is Unreal Engine 5.3, the most recent version, all set up here. This is a different look to what you're used to seeing probably on my YouTube, which is typically a lot of Blender stuff here. So this is like my first time kind of doing a bit of Unreal Engine action. I've been actually, at least publicly, I've done a lot of this for personal projects, for stuff for NASA, for other things. But this is like, I guess, my first time actually making some tutorials or some videos in Unreal Engine. So very excited to have you joining me today for this as well. Let's see. All right, cool. Okay, cool. Yeah, so thanks for joining as well. Yeah, so this is a scene that is in progress. I've posted like a similar piece in Unreal the other day that is now up on my Instagram here, and I can show you that one real fast as well here too. I'll go to my rock environment here. So it'll take a second to load up. And I'll kind of walk through this one, and I'll talk about kind of how I'm designing this last scene here as well, just trying to build this one out to kind of get this to completion. You can see this one's looking pretty good already. There's some kind of messages coming up here. This is all good. I don't need those. So yeah, so let me kind of pan back out here and talk a bit about this scene, because this scene was my first time testing something kind of cool for the phone as well too. So what I was able to do actually was actually take my phone and use it as the camera in this scene here. So if I kind of collapse some of these and scroll down, what's really cool about Unreal is that you're able to actually sync this up in real time with things as well. So I have this actor in my scene, which stuff is a little bit messy here, forgive me, which is, there we go, this VCam actor. And so what I actually did here was record this with my phone. And so what I did was actually sync this to an app on your phone. There's an app you can download. I can shout this out right here as well if you want to download it yourself. It's called the Live Link VCam. There's a great tutorial that is already up on YouTube, not from me, but from another creator that I can link in the description here eventually. That is fantastic, goes into detail on how to set that up exactly. But what's great about it is you can actually then use this camera in your scene as if it's like you walking through your scene. So if I go to my level sequence here, this was actually like a different one. So let me actually open this up here. This was in my VCam actor here. Yeah, so I had this VCam actor in here. This is the camera for it. And so this is mirrored to my walking in real life, which is kind of trippy actually going through and doing this. I was actually kind of like walking around in my scene. And it was actually like mirroring onto the stuff that's going on in Unreal Engine, which is pretty insane. So really fun to kind of do that, and definitely like kind of a new thing to kind of play around with and explore. So very excited to kind of keep testing that out a bit more. But so this scene I built out, it really was a pretty simple one to put together, in all honesty. And so it is just a couple elements here. So we've got our foreground, kind of this cave here. That is mainly designed using some Kitbash, or not Kitbash 3D, sorry, Megascans assets that I've actually blended in a bit more with the scene. So I have this runtime virtual texture that I've applied to both the landscape of my scene. And so if I click on here, I can scroll down and show you this. I've got this landscape material here that actually has attached to it a runtime virtual texture attached to the height map of this for the environment. So what happens is there's almost like a little bit of a fall off or a blend to the textures that are in my scene. And this is something that you can do in Blender too. However, I felt like the setup for Blender, it kind of is a little bit annoying because you are only doing it for one material at a time. There's not really this like master material that applies to everything as much in Blender, I felt like. So for here, I have all of these kind of like Nordic rock, these massive Nordic coastal rock that each are using generally the same material. This like, if I click on here and bring this in here, it's using this Nordic default material. And so they all have the same one that's going on here. So I'm able to actually attach in all at once this material here. This is this runtime virtual texture. And so it's taking a couple different parameters. It takes the base color, specular roughness, and normal. And you have to do a little transform to get this from the world space to the tangent space for this to be able to work. But you just plug this in and then you can blend it in with the original texture. And so actually I've got this additional mapping thing here, this shore wetness. And what this is actually doing for the scene, which I thought was fantastic to do this kind of stuff in Unreal, is, I don't really need this here, was if you see I've got this water body actor in my scene. And so anything that's kind of coming close to this water body, and the way it's defining close is based on the height of this object relative to the water plane. It applies this kind of wetness, and you can really see it very well on this rock here too. And I think just for added realism, this just looks phenomenal. You've got this really cool kind of fall off here. It's a bit of a dimly lit scene, so this kind of is a darker look here, but if I had this kind of lit more for like a daytime scene, you would see this really phenomenal kind of wetness here, almost as if the waves had been lapping against the shore. So it just adds that extra level of photorealism to this, which I think is pretty awesome. And so having that just so easy to set up with just a couple clicks in Unreal, for me, makes it a game changer. And what's also cool too is this water plane, I tweaked the materials a lot on it here, but this water body ocean, you can really tweak a lot of the settings very easily in here too. But what's really great about it is you can actually enable the caustics for this too. So I've actually put some caustics you can see here that are reactive in real time, which looks phenomenal. I mean, it's not the most photorealistic thing ever. If you kind of look at it, there's a little bit of like a weird tiling to it, maybe. But it's believable enough, at least for me, that it kind of makes me happy with kind of the results for this. So I think that's kind of, generally a good look for this. So I'm happy with that result. So there's some factors like that that have helped me, use Unreal Engine a bit more too, which has got me a lot more excited about doing work in Unreal, is this being able to see these and kind of orbit around in real time and see my changes take place in real time. So just designing stuff in here is just such a smoother process in general. So that is, I guess, one big reason why I've been using Unreal Engine. And I want to also talk a bit about specific use cases for why you would use Unreal Engine over something like Blender or Cinema 4D, which is typically what I'm using when I'm making these scenes. I typically use one of those two softwares. I would use Unreal more so for these larger scale scenes. I'd say that because Blender can very quickly get bogged down with the mesh objects that you put in your scene. So say, for example, I'm making this scene in Blender, and I have all of these rocks. Each one of these rocks has a lot of geometry to it, right? To make it look that photorealistic, to make it have the details, the resolution that you want, to make it look crisp. So if I zoom up close to this rock, I just went the wrong way here, but if I look close in on this rock as I slowly pan towards it, you can see it's increasing in detail and more detail the closer I get to this thing. And basically what's actually happening here is, oh, we got a new follower on Twitch. It scared me. Thank you so much for following. Cool. So basically what's happening here is you zoom in here, you're actually seeing the nanite meshes here. So in Unreal, it works so much better to really optimize your scene so that you're not using unnecessary geometry when you don't need it. It's kind of jockeying between different levels of detail to show the most high performance possible for your computer for that scene, for those specific objects that you want. So, for this scene here, I've got these kind of rocks way out in the background here that really don't need any detail at all. I mean, this one's almost completely in shadow here, the way I've kind of set up the lighting, and you've got this kind of lighting going off the water here. You don't really even see it. I mean, save for a couple little details with the rocks and stuff there. So it's not really that big a deal to have a lot of level of detail there. So for that, in Unreal, the way it handles it so well with the nanite meshes, where you can actually go into an individual mesh here. If I go open up my content drawer, I can show you, if I was to click, let's go to, I'm in the actors for this treasure island here. Where did I put these mega scans? So if I go into the 3D assets, let's go into this huge Nordic cliff. I can click on this static mesh and then hit nanite, and it's already enabled for this one because I brought this in and enabled this already. But sometimes by default, when you're bringing in objects in your scene, it's not initially enabled. So you can actually enable this in Unreal so that it is using those nanite meshes instead. And that, like I said, just really speeds up the performance and allows me to make such a big, large-scale scene in real time. So like I'm working on this, and I have amazing responsiveness for my computer. If I show the frame rate here, I'm also streaming at the same time here too, but I'm still getting, I think you can see this here, 80 frames a second still, which is pretty good considering just how much geometry is in my scene. So really cool to see that as well too, just the performance for these. So that's one big use case, is when you're having all these big objects and stuff in your scene, you want it to be actually responsive so you can actually see the results. And in Blender, especially with computers that I feel like aren't as high performance, so say you have like a gaming laptop or something like that, or you don't have, one of the more recent GPUs, making a scene like this is going to be a lot harder for your computer because a lot of this is using my GPU to render these images out. And having Nanite to really optimize my scene just helps a lot more as I'm just kind of dragging and dropping. And so what's so nice is because I have Nanite enabled, I can just duplicate this rock here and you see it's already responsive in real time. I've got this whole nother mesh that I can just move around in my scene and you're not fighting through any noise. This is just the beauty of real time. And so I will say Blender does have Eevee, the real-time render engine as well. However, I have messed around a lot with it, and what I will say is it's a lot harder to nail down the lighting to get it to look like something that you want in Eevee versus Unreal Engine. In Unreal Engine, you've got a couple different things to play with your lighting that can really just elevate it so much, so quickly. You have all of these in your, is it visual effects. You can add in a sky atmosphere. You have volumetric clouds, exponential height fog, local height fog, post-process volume. You can add all these things in, and it really just immediately elevates the photorealism of your scene. Whereas in Eevee, you have to do a lot of different light passes to get the bounces kind of playing how you want. And I feel like I have to fake a lot of the lighting using all kinds of different point lights or spotlights to really, make stuff look a little bit more realistic. And the materials and the textures as a result, I feel look pretty flat and don't really have that same kind of look that you want. So it's a little bit tough to really get as good detail. And so on YouTube, DB Bolaños asks, one question, can apply Nanite to an animated character? Don't quote me on this, but I believe you can. It really should work with almost any object that you bring into your scene. So for this one, actually, let me go to this. I've actually brought in a couple models from Scan the World, which if you don't know what this is already, I've worked with them a bit in the past. They do a lot of really fantastic, this is actually not from Scan the World, this is from Sketchfab, but similar process. What they did is they scanned photorealistic scans of buildings. So they went around with their phone or their cameras, took a bunch of pictures around an object, and were able to make it out. Yeah, so for this one, I just brought in a random object, this static mesh. I was able to make it into a nanite here. I don't have it enabled for this one because I'm not using it in my scene just yet, but for that, I was able to enable it. But yeah, and then also what I like here too is, so I'm using something called Ultra Dynamic Sky. It's a fantastic plugin for the Unreal Engine. It's in the marketplace. I think it's only like $40 or something, but what you get with it is insane. You get just so many controls over all of the different parameters for your sky, your volumetrics. You can even add in weather effects too with it. So if I go back here and actually type in, there it is, UDS, in the blueprints, it's got this Ultra Dynamic Sky Weather blueprint class. And so this actually has snow effects, rain, lightning, I think even like tornadoes or something like that too. And you can actually apply this to your scene and also add in some extra elements like little rain splashes. So you have these weather effects. And so as a spline, for example, you can bring in this like rain drip spline and map it across an object so that it looks like it's like kind of dripping off that object in your scene. So it's really useful, I feel like, for what you get. If you're going to do something similar to this in Blender, which I've done in the past, I made a render a while back, maybe not too long ago actually, that is, let me pull this up and see if I can share it. It is this, where is it? It's like this temple, this Japanese temple that I made. What I actually did for it was did a rain simulation. So I actually simulated rain particles, and then I had to actually simulate the splashes on the terrain. So I actually had a separate material applied to my plane that was actually interacting with the rain droplets that were pouring onto this thing. Yeah, so it's this this one here. So it's this, we've got like kind of the, we'll just transition to a different scene, but it should loop back again in a second here. Yeah, so you've got some rain effects here, so you can see it's actually dripping onto that scene. If I pause here, I actually had to simulate these rain particles and kind of like the bounces off on there. So this add-on in Unreal Engine kind of does that all in one, which is pretty awesome that you can actually do this all at once. So a comparable thing for at least the sky effects in Blender is physical starlight and atmosphere, which I use, I think, for almost every single render that I have in Blender. I use physical starlight and atmosphere because just the flexibility you have in order to be able to design the lighting you're seeing it's so important. I feel like you can use HDRIs to get you part of the way there, but having something that's procedural, where for this, for example, in my UDS, this Ultra Dynamic Sky, everything here is procedural, so I can just go through and adjust all the different parameters. So if I was to go up here, like adjust my cloud cover, I can add in more clouds. So it's a super cloudy scene now. The whole sky's almost blotted out. I can take all the clouds off, and now you just see the Aurora Borealis in my scene too. It's all reacting in real time still here too. And so in Blender, you have that similar add-on, the physical starlight and atmosphere, where you can do similar effects to that as well. So just wanted to give them a shot as well too, because I've talked about them in my tutorials before. But really anything that can speed up your workflow, speed up your process to get you making the renders, the results you want, I think is totally worth the price tag. I try to advocate for free stuff as much as possible. And like I said, when you're just starting out, if you don't want to get into these paid things, you know, at least in Unreal Engine, it's very easy for a lot of these, the visual effects. You have all these, the sky atmosphere, post-process volume. I have all these turned off because UDS does not play well with them. It has their kind of own system, but out of the box, you can already do a lot of this stuff with Unreal Engine. So you don't necessarily need the add-on. The add-on just takes me just a really nice extra step of the way for the weather effects, for the Aurora Borealis, for all these interactive elements and stuff too. And in Blender, the same deal too. They do have a sky texture that you can use out of the box that's decent enough to kind of have some play with it. Physical starlight and atmosphere just blows it out of the water. It's so much better, and so it's really awesome. So definitely advocate for that as well too. But just wanted to open up one of my other scenes here. So that one is one that I already completed. So this is one that I've been working on in kind of my free time here, just designing it out. And so the basic concept for this, it's similar to a render I made actually in Blender before with some of these same assets. So I wanted to work with some Kitbash 3D assets here as kind of the main elements of my scene. I've got these castle elements here, and I want to kind of be guiding your eye into the frame. So this is just kind of the macro scale. You see my whole environment here. And what's always funny about these two, and this is something I've been having to think about a lot more with Unreal Engine, is if I was to turn around here, there is nothing out here except for ocean. But theoretically, the camera's not going to be pointed out there, so it doesn't really matter that that scene is incomplete there. If I was making this in Blender, you know, I would always set up my camera first. That's one of the first things I do for my render is set up the camera off the bat, have that working so that you're actually not seeing anything behind it, and it actually helps me kind of dial in my composition off the bat as well too. So I know what's going on. I have everything kind of working, and so yeah. So that's kind of why I do a lot of this stuff early. Oh wait, hold on. I'm missing some questions here too. Where is this? Let me pull this up in the background here too, so I can see these. I'm multi-streaming right now too, by the way. So if I'm missing your questions, just feel free to put it in again so I can see it. But I saw some stuff come in. What I love about Unreal is that it doesn't crash like Blender with very heavy environments. In specific, if I use Nanite. Yeah, so that's what's great about Unreal is it really is just, it's so much faster and so much more responsive with these things. And like I said, now one of the things I'm starting to run into is these scenes are huge. So, and I'm kind of putting my camera in like a lot of this stuff as well too. Like a lot of parts of these scenes now actually have the camera in them as well. So I have to think a little bit more about what's behind it, especially if I'm kind of moving this camera around. So if I click on my Cinecamera actor here, I'll pin this to the view just so it's there as I'm moving around. You can see the basic idea for this scene, and right now I have this rendering on horizontal. If I was going to be making this for Instagram, I'd kind of adapt the resolution, the aspect ratio, so that it would play a bit better with the vertical format of this. But at least for right now, as I'm kind of concepting, I like to keep things horizontal just so I can kind of take in the whole scene. And so what is going to happen here is the camera's going to kind of walk across this like little bridge here. And if I kind of snap in here a little bit closer, you can see I've kind of modeled this like little walkway that kind of goes through this rocky terrain. And this is in progress right now here still too. So I'm still kind of tweaking in. You can see there's just this gap there that I need to fill in still with some rocks and plants and stuff. But what's really nice is I can kind of get an idea or a little preview for how this animation is going to go. At least this stuff is working through here. So I have these trees that have kind of like a nice little wind effect to them. And these are actually from a free pack that comes with, doesn't come with Unreal. You have to enable it. But you can go over into your Unreal Marketplace, and it's this rural Australia. And it's in the static meshes, vegetation. If I turn on my filters for just the static meshes, you can see I've got all these trees here. And they're all very lightweight generally, so you can kind of just drag and drop them in your scene. So what's really fun is you just place it in there and boom. In Blender, like I said, this takes a lot longer to do. It's a lot harder to kind of get your ideas playing well, playing nicely with your software, and stuff will often crash and you won't really have the best results as you're kind of walking through or working through stuff. So it's a little bit of a pain to kind of get the results, but it's a little bit harder to get things looking, I think, closer to photorealistic here. So I feel like I spent a lot more time playing around with the lighting design, really just trying to nail stuff home here with actor placement, with certain dynamic effects. So like even over here, I've got some like kind of birds, animated birds kind of like circling around in here just for like a little extra touch of je ne sais quoi in the scene there, so that there's something going on to kind of draw your eye into the scene. I can rescale these up here a bit too, just so that they're a little bit larger. So there we go. So they're kind of like a little bit bigger. But yeah, so it's a little bit hard to get the lighting nailed down. And so what I try to do with all 3D software, and this is one of my biggest recommendations, is definitely stay organized, right? You know, keep track of all your layers. I try to group things as much as possible. So I've got like my specific lighting box here, which has all of my point lights, at least the ones I've set so far, and also a spotlight here, which is going to be animated with a bit of fog for the lighthouse in the background. So it's going to be kind of rotating around. So I have that placed in there too. And I also have my UDS blueprint here. So this allows me really quick access to my lighting. So I'm not kind of scrolling through a lot of layers. Same deal here. I've got my landscape elements kind of grouped into this landscape thing here too. So I've got the landscape water brush manager, the water body, ocean, water zone in there. So very easy access to all of those as well. And so that is, I think, just good to have those real quick, easy to see. And let me just kind of remove this out here too. I'm going to hide this for a second, so that's blocking it. Yeah, so this is just kind of nice to have the things very easy access. And same deal here, I've got my Kitbash 3D buildings all in here too. And for these, I actually edited a couple too. So what's nice about Unreal is that all of these Kitbash buildings, they come in as blueprints. So if I was to go to my content, turn off static mesh for a second here, just so I can access this a little bit easier. These are in my Treasure Island folder, and they are in the actors. Each of these is a blueprint class. And so the way that works, for some of these, they're just an individual object. But if I was to take something that's a little bit more going on with it, so for example, this KB3D building large E, and this will take a second to kind of process. You can see it's loading in all the individual meshes into my scene. It's preparing all the static meshes. So this is actually composed of a number of different things, and you can see that in your details panel. And this is something I didn't know initially, because in Blender, the way this works is everything is kind of attached into like a null object typically. So you can kind of grab that null object and move it around your scene. But sometimes for this, you know, I import this in here and, you know, really make it jibe with my scene. I'm not really going for as much of kind of like the pirate aspects to it. I also probably don't need like all these like flags and stuff here. But the way this is operating initially is everything's tied to this blueprint class. So I can just very quickly move everything at once all around in the scene. But if I don't want these flags in my scene, I can actually just go into these components and you can pull them out. But the way that I usually do that a bit better is just go directly into the blueprint class for this. So this will take a second to load up. And now I see I have all these components in here, and I can actually kind of click on them, and it shows me a little bit better where they are in my scene. I can delete them out if I don't want them, so I just get rid of the flags. I have this kind of like hanger thing I don't want as well. So I can just delete those out, maybe I'll probably keep the ladders in, but I don't need these barrels and the bags and stuff, so I'll just delete those from my blueprint class as well. This bag as well. Maybe even the scaffolding I'll keep into. The rope can probably go too. This other rope as well. So then I have all that. I'll just hit save, and then I can click out of this. And so now this just has the objects that I want in it, and everything's attached to the same blueprint class, so I can just kind of maneuver this around my scene. So I've been working to kind of concept very quickly that way too with some of the Kitbash assets. It's just been a nice way to very easily add stuff to your scene and have it kind of mesh and blend in well. So I'm going to kind of put this in almost as like a little lighthouse aspect on this little part here. So this is kind of attached into this part. Maybe that's what the birds are all circling around, is this like little watchtower type thing that's over here. Just to add a little bit of extra detail to that edge of the scene. You can see how that plays in the camera view. You kind of have this like little bell, this little scene over here, which looks nice. Maybe I want to pull one of these guys over here too, so I'm just gonna oops, I don't want to do that. I'm just gonna actually duplicate this and drag it, and then I can rotate this around and like pull this up into the scene so that this is kind of forming a little bit of like a walkway over here too. And it's just nice, again, here, just stuff is so fast. Like, you're concepting in real time with all this. It's just really nice to be able to build these things out so quick and have it work and just be so much faster. So it's just nice to be able to do this. So I have this over here. And so I'm always keeping an eye kind of on the Cine Camera Actor here, which I've pinned. You can actually rescale this if you want to, if you want it a bit smaller. Oops, I didn't want to right click on that. You can always rescale these. I always forget where this is located. And this is one thing that always bear with me here. I always forget as I go back and forth between Blender, Cinema 4D, and Unreal, all like the little shortcut, the hotkeys and stuff here too. Like to orbit around is always different. Right now I'm hitting Alt and middle mouse button to kind of pan around. Alt and right clicking to kind of move in and out of my scene. And then Alt and left clicking to kind of orbit around. So in Blender, you don't need to click Alt at all. It's just the mouse. So sometimes I'll click and I'm like, why am I not moving everything? So I guess you maybe don't need to hear either. Maybe I lied about that actually. I don't know, but I always forget like the different hotkeys, so I'm always kind of like messing around and trying to figure things out here. So let's just duplicate another one of these here as well too, and I'm going to maybe give this like a slight rotation so it's kind of bending back into this mountain. It's okay if it doesn't match up directly, and I'm also noticing that there's this bizarre cannon on there, which is not kind of jiving with the scene that I want for this necessarily. So I'm going to actually go into the blueprint and delete those cannons from the scene and save that out. So we've got these now, and so I'm going to kind of just kind of keep this pattern going. Maybe elevate this one up a little bit, rotate it a bit more so that it's kind of bending back in to the scene. If I kind of go into my rotation tools here, kind of rotate that ever so slightly so it's kind of got a little bit of a bend to it and kind of trying to match that up. It's okay if it's not one-to-one because this is a bit further off into the distance, so we're not really seeing this as close up, so that kind of seam that you're seeing there, it's not really mattering as much for this. The UI and the shortcuts is always what confuses me the most, moving between different programs from Rose Light Moon. Yeah, I feel like that's the thing, and the advice I always give to people who are just learning these software is most of it's all the same, right? Like honestly, a lot of the software, there's not a lot of differences between what you're doing. At the end of the day, you're trying to make a 3D scene. You know, it's just a tool that's trying to get you to that, and if that tool can help speed up your process, or if you just work better, if you kind of play better with that tool, you know, use that one. You know, don't listen to what other people say about choosing a specific render engine or a specific tool to use. But what I will say is the confusing part when I'm bouncing around a lot between these, yeah, the shortcuts gets me every time. So that's always fun to kind of try to figure out as I'm kind of orbiting around and figuring stuff out again. But I think this is starting to look really nice. So basically what I'm doing with these scenes here in Unreal is trying to get it to as close to a final as possible, or as I'm happy with, I guess I'll say. So this, I maybe want a bit further back, so it's kind of bending into this cliff here. And what I do is there's, if you guys were looking at my scenes up close, you would see all like the little errors and the imperfections in them. There's so many little things that I see when I see it, right? I feel like with anyone, when you look back at your work, you see all the imperfections, you see all the mistakes, you see all the weird seams and the errors and glitches. But what I'm basically trying to do for my work is I know what the end product's going to be, right? I know I'm going to make a video here. I know I'm going to make something that's animated. I know generally the direction my camera's moving for my scene. And I know, I guess the end product or the end place where I'm putting this, which is, on Instagram generally, where the resolution is going to be really low. You're going to be looking at it off your phone screen. So you're not going to be seeing a heck of a lot of detail, in all honesty. So I don't need to go crazy specifically for these types of scenes for all the little details, all the minutia of the scene. So I have to think smart about it, as opposed to really kind of going crazy with some of the details. And so if this was for a different project, so for example, if I'm working on a client project where I know I'm going to be zoomed in really close in on here, I do need to refine the details and everything like that. So that's, it's very important to kind of focus on the details. So with all that being said, what I do often in my scenes is patch up all those imperfections with other stuff, right? So you kind of can fill in like the gaps. So for example, if I'm looking at here, this is a really good example. You see this clipping through. I like the placement of this relative to where you're seeing it from the camera here. It's a little bit hard to see because this is kind of zoomed down. However, this specific object is clipping into this scene here. So let's think of a way to kind of get around that. Maybe we can just throw a little tree in front of it, right? Happy little tree. We'll just paint that in the way. And then you don't even think about it. Now, whoever's been watching this live stream, once I eventually post this on Instagram, you can call me out and be like, oh, I know what you did behind the scenes on this file. I saw that there's that weird part of the castle jotting out into that building, and I know you just patched it with the tree. So you can call me out because you're seeing the behind the scenes here, and please do in the comments, call me out on this once this goes live. But generally, you're not going to see that. So you can see it's already looking pretty good. It's already kind of hidden there, but maybe we can take a couple more of my flowers here and kind of patch that hole up even more, just to kind of blend it in a bit more. And again, these are kind of like the last little minor details that I do for a lot of my scenes. I kind of make a pass through, look at it from different angles, look at it as I'm moving my camera through the scene, orbiting it around, and kind of see how stuff is playing generally in the scene. And that is kind of what's giving me that last little bit of detail there to kind of plug in the holes and get things looking how I want them to, right? But it's important early on to not really spend as much time with this. So you're seeing a scene that is already close to completion, in my book at least. You're seeing something that I've already spent a lot of time kind of mapping through and modeling out and kind of building out. So there's a lot of work here that you didn't see already that got to this point, mainly just blocking stuff out. And so Roselight Moon says, that's great advice, James. Thank you. Been used to Blender in earlier UE4 mainly. Yeah, you got to try out Unreal Engine 5. I've been kind of putting off using it for my personal projects here because I just kind of have a certain workflow with Blender and Cinema 4D that I just love. And what we were just talking about earlier with all the different plugins, shortcuts, all the hotkeys and stuff like that, I kind of just didn't feel like relearning a lot of that stuff for Unreal again. I'd used it in the past before, but I'm like, I don't really feel like taking the time to do it. But recently, about a week or two ago, I really sat down and took some time to kind of just figure out all the hotkeys, figure out a lot of the stuff I wanted to do with it, and it's been so much better. And now with the Nanite stuff built into this as well too, it's pretty insane. So it's been really fun to, kind of work through all this stuff and really just build it out. So really been enjoying it. So yeah, definitely check out Unreal Engine 5 if you've not already. It's pretty insane. But yeah, so just kind of building out these last details. And one of my favorite parts, honestly, about Unreal Engine is the foliage painting that you can do. One other tip too, you see me here duplicating the same object over and over again. And I've talked about this a lot in other tutorials, a lot of Blender tutorials specifically, is you can really just design one asset, right? Just build one thing. And you can spam that asset around your scene as much as you want, as long as you're rescaling, rotating, maybe tilting it a little bit, maybe by 10 degrees, kind of maneuvering it around differently. And your brain will basically tell you that that's a completely different actor. That's a completely different object, even though it's literally the same thing. So I'm just taking the same flower tree here. I have like maybe one or two of these kind of iterations, and I can just scatter these around my scene. And honestly, your brain doesn't register that this is a different thing because of the context that it's in. It's maybe blended in a little bit differently to the surroundings. Like I've rotated this now by like 20, 30 degrees. It's blended in differently. It looks completely different, at least to my eyes, probably to yours as well, as you're kind of seeing this in the scene. And so by all intents and purposes, this is a totally different object. And so it's really cool to be able to do that really fast in real time here as well. So you're really seeing that just so much quicker too. So that's one thing I do a lot here as well in the final stages is once I have those objects built out, it's very easy to just kind of drag and drop and maneuver things around. So that's for these objects that I like to manually place generally. So I've got all these different bushes and plants and foliage and stuff that I manually am going to place in my scene because I want it to be in a certain place, right? I wanted this, flower cove here to be in that one spot. I'm probably going to fill more of these in elsewhere. But if I go back to my kind of walkway area up here, this part here, I can kind of just paint in foliage. I don't really need to be too crazy about all of the hand placement with it. And what's great about the Unreal Engine foliage is that you can get a little bit precise with your placement on it here too. So I'm just going to kind of zoom out and frame this up where generally I'm going to place things. You can see I already put like a little bush here where I kind of want that bush detail to be. But initially I've got this kind of stairwell. You see my camera actor right there. I've got this stairwell and I kind of want this to be framed a little bit by some like grass or mossy type elements. So I can go on to the foliage painting mode. And you see I don't have any foliage currently visible here, but I do have some stuff that I've actually brought in this is from the, what's it called? Quixel Bridge, right? Oops, this opened up in my other window. Let's take a second to load. This comes free with Unreal Engine, so you're able to mix and match stuff with Unreal. It plays really well. It's a great add-on that's built into here. And so if you don't use this already, I definitely encourage you to check this out. It's going to take a little while to load just because it's a lot of assets, so I'm going to put that on the side screen. But I'm using Quixel for these flowers. Oh, there we go. Finally loaded up as soon as I take it off. Whoa, that looks weirdly distorted. I guess because I'm streaming at the same time here, it's lagging out. But you can see kind of in the bottom here, the scrunched assets. These are the grass, some of the grass elements that they have available here. So I'm just going to minimize that for now because I already have some of these imported in here. So I'm going to go to my content drawer again. And I have these in my Megascans. Actually, I brought these in as a separate asset altogether. There's these Lush Plants, this Lush Plants folder. I'm going to go to actually, let's first go to the master materials. Let's talk about this for a second too. So in the foliage master materials, you can actually enable wind usually. I think this is the right one actually, so I might have to dig around here. Where is this? So this doesn't have a nanite either, so we want to make nanites for these as well. I'll do that in a second. But in the meantime, I can scroll down here. Is this on this one? I think it's in this one. Maybe it's not in this one. But there is a way, trust me on this, that you can actually enable the wind for all of your elements, and it works really well. I'm not seeing it for some reason on this one. I think it might not be that material. So we'll deal with that in a little bit. Maybe if I just go to a specific plant here, pull up my static mesh is a hard word to say. So loading some of these up, I'm going to look for like a specific one here. Maybe we want, I don't know, some of these little tropical bushes or something like that. We can experiment around with these as well too. So I'm going to click on this, actually just enable nanites. So that'll take it a second to load, but now this is a nanite mesh. I'm just going to drop this in here just so we can play around with just this one to start off. It's going to take a second to prepare the shaders. It's preparing that in the background, but in the meantime I can select this, and you see we've got this nice little mesh here. So this is what I'm going to be using for initial scattering here, so we can kind of put this around our scene. And so you can actually enable some walkable stuff here, so you're kind of like stepping on these plants too, which is kind of fun. I've not really gotten into that as much, I feel like. Mainly what I've been doing is just the animation feature of these, which for some reason I'm blind. If someone can see that and is more familiar with Unreal, let me know because I'm looking past it. And I know how to enable this, but for some reason I'm forgetting where it is. But I've got this selected, and so let me actually increase my brush size. It's pretty small. And we can actually just go about painting these in. You can see these are already starting to populate in my scene, and it's looking really cool. Super fast, and it is updating the shaders. It takes a second there to load. But you can see we've got these little kind of like bushes in our scene. And it just very nicely conforms to the terrain. If I put some of these where I don't want, so you see I've got these kind of on my staircase where I don't necessarily want them, I can just go to the erase tool, and we can just like pull this off. If you were to do this in Blender, I'll shout some software out here as well too that I really like to use for Blender. GeoScatter is probably my favorite one to use in Blender. It is phenomenal add-on. It really has like so much flexibility, but at least for now, you have to apply it to a single layer, or single object, that is. So if you have like a plane in your scene, typically what I would do for like my scenes in Blender is I have like a plane that I've deformed, I've modeled it a little bit, gave it a little bit of warping or something to kind of be a little bit photorealistic. Then I can add in effectively these particle systems with Geoscatter that you can paint in. And I will give it credit, it's a phenomenal asset or piece of software for Blender, because you have so many options with vertex painting, weight painting, masks. You can do really cool stuff where you can basically tell the surrounding foliage or plants to kind of avoid a certain thing. So say you're making like some steps or something. Let me actually just pull this up in Blender Market to show you, because this is really cool. And I kind of want to do this justice just because it's a really fun piece of software. So I'm going to pull this in here for a second so you can see it. So Geoscatter. It's got a price tag attached. Scary, I know, but it's worth it. I can link this in the description if you want to download this as well. But it's phenomenal, and what's great about it is you see all these different things you can do. And I feel like I've just scratched the surface with these, but you have these ID maps that you can use where you can basically tell certain sections to be certain plants. And you do this by basically painting in different things. So you tell it like, oh, everything that is on a red square or a red pixel is going to be this plant. Everything's a blue thing, that's this. It's basically the principle of vertex painting. So it's really nice. You can do that really easily to have objects scattered around in specific things. You can do it for other things here too. So this is an example of with like buildings or some kind of like circuit board or something like that. So that's pretty cool as well. But then what I think is really cool, which I've just started to kind of get into a bit more, is some of these advanced things here as well. So you have this dynamic effect here where you see this example, they have like these pine trees in the middle. And they're trying to kind of effectively like scatter smaller bushes or plants around it. So it's really cool to be able to do that, because before this would take a lot of time to kind of do and to get look right. This is another great example too, and they actually have this demo file available for you to kind of play around with. Let's go back here. They have this demo file available on their page. I can open up that in the back end. So you can actually download a couple of these and kind of see how they play. And this is actually really helpful because I kind of wasn't initially sure how some of these were supposed to work, but you can dive into their demo scenes. This one is a really fun one because if you're trying to make, I forget what they're called, but they're like the little, effectively like tiles or pieces of concrete that you'll have in like a garden. And like you want obviously plants and stuff to not be clipping through those. So you can make these kind of simple meshes. You can see here they've kind of just used these kind of little squashed cylinders almost here that they're using as like a mesh. And what's great about that is you can then tell Scatter to avoid putting these larger clumps of grass around there. So if I show you here too, there's these kind of like larger clumps of grass. They're rendering these as proxies just so it renders quicker as opposed to rendering a real thing. But these would be blades of grass, like larger clumps. Those would be avoided in the areas around this mesh. And you can define that specific area in Blender, which is really cool too. So you can say within maybe like, I don't know, a 10 pixel radius or something like that, or 10 centimeter radius, let's say, you'd want none of the big clumps, but instead you want these smaller individual blades of grass that won't clip through your little planters here. So it's really great for that. And you can see here too, I love painting with the vertex colors. This is, I think, what I do the most in Blender. So all the scenes that you see that I've made with like a lot of the flowers and stuff like that, I typically hand paint everything in with vertex color maps because the flexibility you have with it to be able to blend them together and get great results. You see in this example here, it just looks awesome. That's really great. But I will say again, for Blender, you're only applying that to one object. So for this, it's kind of some sphere or something that they've deformed that they're applying it to. Whereas here, you are just painting your foliage on everything. So I could go crazy with this. So right now I'm painting it on, this terrain, this rocky terrain. But you can see I'm also painting it on this pathway, this walkway here too with no problems. I don't have to define a separate particle system. I can erase these super easily if I don't want to. So this is just the flexibility of Unreal, which for me, for larger scenes in Blender, it's just so much better because I don't have to be defining all these things individually. In Blender, it just takes so much longer to kind of go through. Oftentimes what I end up doing is just kind of merging elements together, merging objects and stuff so that I can kind of paint everything uniformly, but then that starts to lag stuff out, especially when you're adding in a lot of particles. So again, I have this as a nanite mesh too, so it's actually rendering much quicker. And so even though I already have, you can see here this number that's popping up on the screen, I have 74 of these already in my scene. And my computer's not having any problem rendering these out, and I can paint these exactly where I want to really get the desired look. It takes a little bit more elbow grease maybe because you actually have to be kind of individually painting these in. This can be a little bit time consuming with the brush technique, but honestly, it's kind of therapeutic. It's kind of like the Bob Ross of 3D part here, almost like where you are, effectively just enjoying yourself and just having fun painting in these last little details. And it's like, it's just fun. I don't know. I just personally enjoy it. It's just a very nice part of the process. And you can mix and match things as well too, which is nice. So say I want to use, I don't know, this other mesh here too. Let's pull in a couple here so we can paint stuff at the same time. Maybe this Calotropis procera. Hopefully that's pronounced right. I am not a botanist, so if I mispronounce that, let me know in the comments. But I can add this in here into my foliage folder. Let me go into my selection here, and I will add this into my foliage folder. So we have this here. So now we've got a second type, so we can select this as well. So we got both these selected. I can then select this guy here as well, and this guy here. So we've got both of them, and now we can paint with both of them at the same time. And it is super quick and easy, and you get like really great results really fast. So you can see it's mixing both of those assets together, and on top of it, it's using the Nanite mesh. So it's really nice to be able to do that. I feel like this is just something that allows me to have a lot more flexibility and a lot more fun personally in Blender, in Unreal Engine rather, compared to Blender. And so for these larger scenes, it works particularly well. And so you can just really just adjust stuff quickly. And so what I'm actually doing here is I'm hitting the bracket keys, so I don't have to go all the way back up here to resize my my brush to get in a little bit more precise in some of these parts here. So that looks really great as well. Bob Ross of 3D, it's true though, always love painting in foliage. Yeah, absolutely. It's just something therapeutic about it. I don't know. It's kind of like you're just creating nature. It's just fun. I don't know. It's just like a cool process. So I spend a lot of time. This is kind of often I speed through this in like the time-lapse videos I post on YouTube or other stuff because it's like a long process to kind of put this stuff in. But I think it's arguably one of the most important processes. So I've got a lot of these already in here. You can see every time I paint, the number is increasing for these assets. And so I'm just kind of adding these in. And I want to kind of add a little bit more color in here too. So if I'm looking again, my workflow basically with all these is I'm always constantly going back and forth between adding stuff in, like I'm zoomed in really far, like I'm zoomed in really close in on this pathway, like I'm looking like, centimeters away from this pathway. I'm adding in like, plants and stuff on top of it. But the whole time I want to kind of keep an eye on the bigger picture, right? You don't want to lose sight of kind of the larger scene that you're putting together. So what's helpful for me is I always have my Cine camera actor here pinned in my scene just so I can kind of get an idea of what this is looking like on a more macro scale because you can get so zoomed in. And typically what I do for Blender with this, the way I have my Blender laid out, I usually have in this kind of margin area here, the rendered view of my scene. I don't touch that as I'm orbiting around. Or I have you guys up on my second monitor here, so I'm kind of monitoring the chat. If you have any questions, again, feel free to drop them there. But that's usually where I'll drag out a window from Blender. I'll kind of detach the whole panel and I can have it off to the side. So I'm looking at it there. And then I'm in the minutia, I'm in the nitty-gritty of my scene, really going crazy, adding in all these details in my main scene. But then I can kind of look off and see kind of how the whole of the composition is coming together there. So that's, I think, very important. And one of my biggest tips for 3D artists is to not always sweat the details. Keep an eye on the larger scene that you're trying to make. It's very quick to get bogged down, and then you can kind of get burned out. I think when I was first starting out with 3D, that was one thing that kind of overwhelmed me a lot, is that you look at these tutorials on YouTube and you see these like crazy compositions and you're just thinking to yourself, there's like no way I'm ever going to make something like that, right? There's like no possible way that I'm going to be able to build out like such a big scene, such a large scale thing. I'm just going to have to like really settle for, kind of phoning it in, and then you're going to delete the software and you kind of call it a day. But there's so much more to these things. And one thing that I'm noticing here as well, sorry, I'm getting distracted here. This object surface is almost like 90 degrees to the plane, to the horizontal. So if I go to kind of paint on this, you see nothing's happening. No matter how much I click, it's like, why is it not painting on there? Well, it's because it is having to do with this ground slope angle. So it has a maximum of 45 degrees. So anything that is at a 45 degree tilt off our horizon is the maximum where it's going to paint. So that's why if you look here, this thing almost looks like it's tilted 45 degrees, this like pathway, and I'm able to paint on it. You can see I'm able to paint on that just fine because that's tilted 45 degrees. But if I was to jack this up, let's put it like something crazy, even like 180, right? That's like painting almost completely upside down here. Now I can actually paint onto other surfaces with it. So you can see I kind of put this around the ground slip angle. Is that right? Yeah. Oops, I don't want to do that. But yeah, so it's just so much nicer to be able to see your like results in real time and be able to paint stuff in really nicely. So that's always really fun. I like just doing this part of the process, just kind of adding in all these details. But again, don't lose sight of the bigger picture. That's like my biggest tip. And don't get burnt out from it. And I think what's also helpful, I've been working on this scene for a couple of nights now, kind of coming back to it. It's always helpful to kind of take a break and like step back from what you're doing, because you can very quickly, is this like not applying to the right one? Okay, here, I think this is not updating here what I want it to do. So let me actually check this again here. So this ground slip angle should be, let me just set this to 180, directly type that in. Yeah, so that is, okay, that seems to be working. There we go. Okay, yeah, perfect. So now it's working. Now it's painting on the angle, on the slope. Okay. But yeah, so I just kind of come back to these a lot of times with a fresh set of eyes. And then you kind of realize like all these things that you might have missed before when you're like looking back at it again. There's like so many little details and things like that that you might have like missed the first time that you might think of again when you're kind of rewatching or kind of going back through stuff. I'll even do this for like super old projects that I haven't like touched in a very long time. I'll go back and like really tweak like a lot of the details and stuff on these things. And you just kind of never know what you're going to kind of come up with the next time. So for this, for example, I was just talking about this a second ago. So I was looking at the Cinecamera actor, and this area in the foreground is getting a little bit lost. It's kind of dark there, and it's also kind of one color largely. You have like a lot of this green, almost like black color here from these things. So it's kind of getting lost, which kind of intentional, right? Like I want your eyes to be kind of guided into the frame as if you're walking along this path. So I want that path to be kind of the focal thing, but to really make it cozier, to give it that James Film signature touch, I usually give it like a little bit of a pop of color for these things here. So I'm browsing now for some assets that would work well for that little bit of color. I don't want it something crazy here, but just enough to kind of give you that je ne sais quoi again for the scene that's really like tying it together. So I actually really like this flowering plant here. So let me convert this to a nanite here. And I'll go back to my selection, and I'm going to add in I'm going to deselect this one. Let's put this into our foliage type here. So we got this flowering plant, and I can go into the paint options for it. Select this in here, and you can see it's selected. I'm going to change its ground slope angle as well, just a little bit more, so I'm able to kind of paint this on some of these slopes. And you can see it's very small, so kind of faint, which is almost perfect. That's kind of what we're looking for. But maybe I want to kind of scale it up just a little bit more, or something like that. So let's make it just a little bit bigger, so we can increase the maximum size of these. I'll make this maybe like a 2. So now it's painting some that are a little bit larger, some that are a little bit smaller, and maybe you don't want this brush as big, so I can get a little bit more precise with the placement on these. So I can put these in here. You see these are a little bit larger scale. But if I'm looking in my view, you can see it just has that little extra pop of color that looks nice and kind of blends in well with the rest of our scene. So I kind of want to frame these on some of these little key points. And I'm actually thinking of putting some kind of lighting on these little raised rocks here too, just to kind of draw your eye a little bit more in there. I actually kind of don't mind a few little flowers on that area there. It's kind of nice. But just really filling out this pathway and guiding your eye through the frame. And so this is something I've been thinking about a lot more. It's just kind of the overall design of my scenes. Like I said, I typically block in my scene composition pretty early on. So I kind of have a general idea of where I want things to be. And so I don't have to be designing stuff behind the camera like I panned before. There is nothing behind this camera. The main part of the scene is what you're seeing here, looking forward. So that's mainly what I'm focusing on. However, with Unreal, eventually I want to open these up a bit more for you, the viewer, to actually explore and walk around in these places. If you have a VR headset, you can go into these scenes and you can actually be exploring around in them and, taking them all in. So I've been having to think a lot more about the overall composition of how these scenes will flow. And one great way to do that, again, I'll shout out this little app that I have on my phone here. This is pretty cool. This Live Link camera thing. I'm not going to show this because it has my IP address on here, and I don't want that. But there's this great app, this Live Link app. So it allows you to basically, literally in real life, walk around in your scenes. I do this also with my VR headset, which you can hook up to Unreal too. And it is a surreal feeling. It's kind of this like uncanny valley it falls into like a little bit where like it very much feels like it's kind of existing at the boundary of this real and surreal where you're kind of like, I don't know, immersed in the scene in such a different way. It feels so much more real, more present, and it's just so nice to be able to preview that in real time. I think the very last video I put, or maybe one of the most recent videos I put on my YouTube, was related to creating scenes in VR in Blender. And what I'll say to that is it is really fun to create stuff in Blender. A lot of these VR stuff and scenes like that are pretty cool to do. But Unreal, man, it's a totally different game. It's just so much more immersive with those the Live Link app. And it just adds that realism. Like I said, too, you can use your virtual camera that I have. I don't have it enabled in this scene yet, but that's one of the last things I'm going to do once I have everything cooked up here. I'm going to actually swap out the Cinecamera actor for a virtual camera actor. You can add those in your Place Actors panel. It is in the virtual production, virtual camera actor. So you just add that to your scene, and you go through kind of the process of setting this up. It's in the plugins here. It's called VCam. Is it virtual production utilities? You want that enabled. You want virtual camera enabled, virtual camera core, all those enabled, and that will allow you to actually hook up your phone or iPad or whatever to Unreal and be able to use that in real time, which is pretty crazy. So that's one of the last things I'll do before hitting render is actually adding that virtual camera into the scene. So yeah, so this is kind of getting close to where I generally want it. Like I said, one of the biggest things I spend the most time with is lighting design in my scenes. It really tells a story. It highlights certain things. As I'm looking at this scene, I really kind of want this cozy, guidepost feeling almost as if you're like walking into this castle after hiking for miles, whatever. You stumbled upon this beautiful castle that has just appeared for you. And so I wanted to kind of almost be beckoning to you, to really invite you to kind of come in and explore this place. And so the way I've done that is twofold. So first off, kind of backlit it a little bit here. So if I go to my castle and zoom in a little bit more, you see I've kind of framed it. It's a little bit hard to see with that outline on there, but there's a little bit of like a light coming in here. And I have very simply placed 2 point lights. If I go to my lighting design tab here, I should probably label these lights too. What's really helpful is once you have like a ton of lights in your scene, point light 8 just doesn't cut it. So typically what I'm going to do is actually just rename this. So I can name this point light and then like backlight castle. So I know exactly what light that is. And so I can click on that and move it around. And so this is kind of a key light for my scene here, because if you look here, it's pretty small, but if you're looking at that on your screen, look what happens when I turn this on and off. So I'm going to turn that off, and then I have another one next to it too that I'm going to turn off. You're kind of losing this castle now, right? If you're looking at the scene, it's kind of almost completely silhouetted, which is maybe a cool effect still. That could be kind of what you're going for. But I feel like it's a very different feel than what I would typically go for in my scenes, because it has a little bit more of like maybe a horror film vibe or like a liminal space vibe to it. Like there's this kind of abandoned place, but there's still like a light on, but only that one light we're seeing. I want this to feel a little bit more lived in, like there's actually people there. Maybe once you go in there, there's like this beautiful great hall that you can relax in, cozy up with a nice book. I want your mind to kind of start thinking about those cozier things as opposed to kind of this like horror thing. And the way it looks now, it's a little bit spooky, not gonna lie, this kind of thing perched up on a hill. But if I turn these lights back on, you see the difference that makes. It almost has like this feel that there's like a courtyard or something within the castle walls that people are maybe congregating in. There's something going on. Maybe we hear some like noise or crowd noise there. So there's people there. It feels more lived in. It has this very different feel, this very different effect to it. So I think it's really nice to do that instead, to have that backlight. And then, excuse me, yawning here, getting tired. Inside this is a couple different point lights as well too. So you see I kind of have this little like cathedral-esque element here. And I've got these windows that you can kind of see visible here too. I've just placed some point lights inside there as well too. So there's a couple point lights here. And I've given these a very warm color. So you can see I can go in here and color pick. So I've kind of chosen like a nice golden yellow color here. If you want to copy these for your own scene, I'll leave that up on the screen for you to see the hex codes for these. That's typically what I do. Same deal in Blender too. When I'm adding in these scenes, I like kind of like a golden touch to my scenes. That's at least kind of just the color palette that I operate with. I feel like it's a very cozy color, as opposed to, I don't know, let's like give it a more like blue look here, right? You can see how much that's changed fundamentally the feel of this already. It's more of a cold light. You know, it's kind of a little bit spookier, a little bit more Halloween vibe to it, which I don't really want as much. So I keep kind of the golden colors. And then there's a couple properties in here that I focus on. One big one, obviously, is the intensity. And so I have this in Candela's units, CD. And, you know, I'll kind of play with adjusting this up and down. It sometimes takes a second to process. You see that's it with no power. This is it with like full power. It's a little bit too bright. So I kind of go somewhere in the middle. And then one big thing that can really help adjust your lighting too is this attenuation radius. And this is displayed very nicely in Unreal with this kind of bounding sphere that you see here on your point lights. And so as I expand this out, you see the sphere increases. So now you see where that fall off is taking effect. And you can see it's now hitting these rocks that are outside, which maybe could be what I'm going for. However, for this key light here, this is kind of the main light for this cathedral. I don't want it to be bleeding because what you're seeing now is there's this weird kind of bleed onto the side walls and stuff here, which I don't really want as much. So what I'm going to do is keep that radius small, maybe even a bit smaller so we're not as much of that bleed in there. So it just is inside this building. You see how it's just inside that wall now. But then what I can do is actually duplicate this light. So I'm just going to hit Alt and drag, and so now I've got a second one of these lights. I can place this light immediately outside. And I'm going to increase its attenuation by a little bit here. And what I don't want is that super high intensity. So now this is outside. You see like these lights are kind of casting this glow outside. But if you're looking, this is like overpowered in my scene here. So I'm going to just pull the intensity down a lot here. So I'm going to just drag this down a lot. You don't really need a whole lot for this to kind of sell the effect. So this is honestly going to be at like maybe like a 1 even. But the difference that this makes, where is this one? This is point light 10. Oh, no, that's not point light 10. What is this? It's point light 8. So I'm going to rename this one to point light front bounce, I'll call it, because they were bouncing off these rocks and stuff here. So the difference this makes is pretty drastic, though. You see it kind of just brightens up that part of the scene. And it adds kind of like a nice little bit of like a rim light almost to some of the plants that I've placed around here, too. So if I kind of zoom in a bit more here, you see this effect that it has on the plants. Maybe I just increase this brightness just a hair more, maybe 2.5. And again, I can come back and tweak these a lot, and I will. I often will come back and forth between things. But I just want these plants, the color of them to come back a little bit more because we're kind of losing that into the darkness, the shadows of this castle. So I want these kind of like nice purple plants to really be visible. Maybe same deal with this like little golden orange one. I'll drag one of these out here and kind of place this into my render. So I can kind of put this into the corner here. And these are just going to be getting a nice little bit of a rim light to them. And you can see it's bringing out that color just that much more. So it just has such a nice effect to it. So we have this like orange cluster here, and I'll just place that in here too. So again, this is kind of the last step of the process, and probably the most important. It's probably the one I spend the most time with. I feel like modeling the scenes and kind of building stuff out initially really doesn't take a lot of time, especially with a lot of the tools that are at our disposal with a lot of these software. You really don't need to spend too much time to make these scenes. The hardest part is that like last 10% of your scene is nailing in the lighting, nailing in all the little details. But it's really what sells your story, really what tells this narrative so much more. You know, it's so much more important to kind of have those extra little details into your scene. And so that's often what I spend the most time kind of doing, is all those little last details, the birds flying around, the lights moving, the kind of camera shake effect to kind of sell everything. And so that's what I'm kind of working on here. And so, you know, I'm still going to come back to the scene probably and revise it a bit more as I go through, but this is getting me to basically like where I want it to, I think. And you can see there's some stuff here on the beach I probably want to fix up too. This is looking kind of like uniform. I zoom in here, look at the rocks. This is kind of like one color, the sand. It's not really kind of coming through. So one of the last things I'm going to do is probably add some rocks, similar to what you saw in that other file I was showing before, where you have the runtime virtual texture blending on the landscape, blending in with the textures. So you have this kind of like nice bleed, almost looks like the sand is kind of coating these rocks, like they've been there for a while, the wind's blowing on them. There's all these details. And one big tip I talk about a lot as well too is if you ever feel like stuck on something, so like say I'm looking at this scene here, this beach part in particular, and I don't know what to finish the scene with, I don't know how to get this to a place I'm happy with it, go look at references. Go outside, touch grass, like literally. It's very important because you can actually see how these textures operate in real life, and it gives you a better idea of how these things function, and you can just really make this stuff so much more believable. So I think it's really cool to kind of do all these things and kind of add thing there. So that is going to be ending soon, but wanted to jump on here first. This is the first time I'm streaming to both Twitch and YouTube at the same time, which is pretty cool. So definitely going to do these in the future as well. And if you found this to be helpful, let me know. Let me know what else you'd like to see from these as well too, as I kind of dive into my process a bit. This is stuff I kind of do anyway. Like I'm just designing these scenes anyway in my free time or working on these things. And so, you know, I don't mind having the camera going, like talking through these things as I kind of operate through it. So, excuse me, yawned a lot here. It might be time to call it a day for this. But yeah, just wanted to kind of show the new process, the new workflow. So Unreal Engine is phenomenal so far. I've really been enjoying it a lot. I think it's really going to be something I'm going to be using a lot more in the future to kind of build out these scenes, and just the flexibility